So now that we have the characters out of the way, we can finally get to the story, which pretty much about anyone who played this game basically praises the game for, saying that it's the best part of the game. But I don't think it's the actual story of Ethan Mars trying to find his son, Sean Mars. But I think it's really just where we learn about how the Origami Killer, became the Origami Killer. Basically the Origami Killer's inception, which I absolutely love, and that's probably the best part about the game. And the overall story of Ethan trying to find Sean is very solid as well, and it's done very, very great, and actually a little bit differently than how most stories about a father trying to find their son or, their child. It's done a little bit differently than how it usually is. But let's go ahead and talk about the actual story. The story of Heavy Rain is a killer known as the Origami Killer, like I've mentioned before, is taking children from, I believe, the ages of 8 and 14, if not, very sorry about that, and he is holding them in an open well during the rainy day seasons where heavy rains basically fill up the well and drown the victim. Something about this that I actually really like is that the Origami Killer doesn't exactly murder his victim. Like with any other killer, they would usually kill someone with, say, a knife or a gun, or would choke them to death. But the Origami Killer, it's not really up to him whether or not the person, the victim, the child, lives. It's really up to the fathers or the parents of the kidnapped child. That it's really up to them whether or not the child dies, because they're the ones that have to save them. So that's something that I really found interesting. The killer's weapon isn't a gun or a knife like in any ordinary, serial murderer would have. It's just rain, which when you think about that kind of sounds really stupid and ridiculous, but the way it's pulled off in the story and in the game, it's really done right and really done awesome. And it makes for a very unique serial killer, which you kind of have to question whether or not he's a serial killer at all. I mean, yeah, sure, he kidnaps people and stuff like that, but he doesn't actually kill them. It's really up to, the parents. But then again, everyone calls him the Origami Killer because usually most of the children end up dying. So that was a very interesting part. But what happens is the main character, Ethan Mars, his son, Sean Mars, is one of the unfortunate people who gets kidnapped and is a victim of the Origami Killer. And it's up to Ethan Mars, as well as Madison Page, Norman Jayden, and Private Detective Scott Shelby, to find out who the Origami Killer is, as well as find out where Sean Mars is being held before time runs out and Sean Mars drowns. This is a great story, even at parts where it's not incredibly original. It's still very solid and still a very entertaining and enjoyable story. But I've heard some people criticize the game for having a very Saw-like or Taken-like plot where it's so like those movies where, to the point where it's basically just borderline, if not ripping those movies off. But I have to completely disagree. There are plenty of other movies besides Taken and Saw that use plots just like those films. The plot where people, where, say, a father's child gets kidnapped, that's been done a million times in movies before, Taken. And to add insult to injury, Heavy Rain was in production way before Taken even came out, or was even in production, so it was kind of a big coincidence by then. And I think Taken came out a year before Heavy Rain came out, so, that, I guess, adds to a lot of, oh, well, maybe it was a ripoff, when really it isn't. And also Saw, again, people are put in traps a lot of other times in movies. Hello, this has been done a billion other times in movies, even movies where it's not a victim. Well, yeah, it is a victim. I don't know where I'm going with that, but these plots have been done way other than, these plots have been done way before even Saw did it, and even if these people are doing it, it's not ripping off, it's probably paying homage to. So, it's really not ripping off, in my opinion, but if you think it is, then, well, you could state, why you think it's a rip-off in the comment section below. But I thought the story was really done right. But where it definitely counts is basically the inception of the Origami Killer. Now, the killers in usual movies and stuff like that, like, say, in either slasher films or just whodunit films, is that the killer is usually seen with a really generic and really overused plot line of where he either had a bad childhood or his parents never loved him or he was beaten as a kid, yada yada yada. Very unoriginal story. But with the Origami Killer story, it's anything but that. It's a really, well, there is one little thing that's kind of unoriginal, but the way that he does become the Origami Killer is very, very original. The plot of how he becomes Origami Killer is, he had a brother named John Shepard, and his last name was Shepard too, but I'm not going to give away the first name yet, because I will give away to one of the characters who is the Origami Killer. But he and his brother John were poor, and they grew up on this construction site, and they had a very alcoholic, very arrogant, very basically just downright bad father. So one day, him and his brother were playing hide and go seek, and John accidentally fell into a water pipe while it was raining, and his foot got stuck and he couldn't get out of the water pipe. So the other brother went to the father, but he was too drunk and too out of it to even help him out of the water. So when the other brother got back to where John was, he sadly drowned, and that's basically the whole character of the Origami Killer, and where he got his inspiration and style of basically murdering his victims. That right there is a great, great, great awesome motivation, as well as where the killer got his style of doing that. That's something that I don't really see done in a lot of whodunit stories, where they tell us why the person murders people, but not really in a fashion of why someone murders them. Like, if they kill him with, like, a necktie, well, why in a necktie? Why not just shoot him with a gun or stab him with a knife? Here they tell you why he drowns people, basically as a style and sort of as a throwback to his brother, which is really good. The only thing I didn't really like is that the father was just a stupid, dumb, drunk father, like in a lot of other things and stuff like that. But I'm glad that they didn't just use that as the motive, like, oh, he has had a bad childhood or something like that. I really like that they did something a little bit original with it, and they also showed the style of how, and they also showed, you know, how he, the style of his murders. It's just a great idea. I just really liked that, and I thought it was very original, very cool, and just overall really a great and very, very original, if not the most original killer origin that I've ever seen in my life. And it's great. It's amazing. You actually do get to play as the two brothers during that sequence, which is a pretty nice touch. You really don't get that in most games or whatever. I really did like that a lot. Now, I think I should probably give away who the Origami Killer is, and the reason why I didn't very much like it. Now, the Origami Killer is, and again, I said this in the last video, I'll say it again here, this is a very spoiler-filled series of videos. If you don't want to find out who the Origami Killer is, click away from the video now. I don't know when I will stop talking about the spoilers, but just click away now and stop watching these series of videos. Go buy the game or go watch it online. I don't care. Leave this video now if you don't know. You've been warned. But the Origami Killer turns out to be Scott Shelby. And this is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. For a number of reasons. The first reason is, well, here's the thing. As usual with whodunit stories and who committed the crime, they always pick the person that would be least likely of the crime. It's the classic cliche in every single murder mystery. But with Scott Shelby, there was nothing pointing towards him being the Origami Killer. Usually with each character, even the ones that seem least likely, they make one little hint towards it. But here, they just kind of drop on you, like, oh, yeah, he's the killer, even though it doesn't really make much sense at all. Yeah. There was a character named Carter Blake in this, who was also a cop, and they even allude to the fact that the Origami Killer was a cop, and he's an asshole, and he's too arrogant, and he's just an all-around dickhead throughout the whole game. It would have been better if he was the killer. Two best friends who did a whole playthrough series of this game, which is hilarious. Definitely check it out. said that that would have made more sense, like, it said for Carter Blake to be, the, Origami Killer, like, yeah, it would have been too on the nose, and it would have been way too obvious, but I'd rather have it be way too obvious and way too on the nose, you know, if it made sense. Why? Scott Shelby. He's a great character, he's an awesome, loving, cool guy, and he just dropped it on us that he's an Origami Killer. That just sucks. Also, we're allowed to play as Scott Shelby. Like, why? Like, that was a huge problem, like, when it was revealed that he was a killer. Like, why would it be Shelby? Like, why were we playing as the Origami Killer? Like, we didn't play as the parts where he committed the crimes. That wasn't the case. The case was, we were playing as this guy, and at any time, if you were the killer, wouldn't you have thought to yourself, wouldn't have you thought to yourself, you know, damn, the last body that I did, you know, the last kid that I killed, it was pretty ugly. Kind of glad that I killed her. Like, you, at any point, he could have just thought to himself, you know what, I'm the killer. Like, anything that had to do with him as being the killer, it would have been, it was terrible as having him be the Origami Killer and having to play as him. You don't play as a fucking character that is the killer. It's a terrible idea. Like, why didn't you have to play as Lauren? That would have been way better. It would make so much more sense. You know, you play as her, you team up with Shelby, and then you learn later that, oh my god, he's the Origami Killer. That would have made more sense, because we would still know what Shelby's doing, but we wouldn't have the question of, if he's the killer, why would he, you know, like, why would we play as him? Why? Like, you would play as Lauren, and you would still know what everything Shelby's doing, besides, it just doesn't make sense. Like, why would you make him the killer and have to be able to play as him? When you're playing as him, as the killer, there's really nothing that you can show that alludes to him being the killer. It's stupid, it's dumb, it's just ridiculous. And 3, the killer commits a crime in the same room that Shelby's in, and that's the problem. Shelby's the killer, and we see him as the killer commits the crime. He murders this clock owner, this clock shop owner, and we see Shelby in one room as we see the the shop owner get killed. Logic? No logic to be seen here. This is how many logics were in that one scene. Fucking none. Like, nothing alluded to him being the Origami Killer. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. As from the words of Norm and Jaden. Jesus Christ. Like, seriously. You were going so good until you got to the end. In fact, that's the thing that pisses me off the most. They were doing so good until they got to the end, and just everything fucking falls apart. Like, it's a great game, and, like, a lot of the pros outweigh the cons, but the fucking bad shit, oh my god, that deserves its own video. I'll make a whole video talking about all the bad shit in this game. It's still a great game, don't get me wrong, but the bad stuff, Jesus, the bad stuff, it just fucking pours on and on and on, scene after scene, at the end. At the fucking tail end of the film, of the game. Bullshit. That is bullshit. But that's just my whole spiel and rant about the Origami Killer. Stay tuned for part 4, where I'll probably go into some of the gameplay. And part 5, I'll probably talk about a lot of the plot holes, because that just deserves its own video in itself. So, stay tuned for that. I'll see you soon, and take care.